So this is Asian Movie Talks. My name is Reuven. My name is Reuven, and I'm here with Karla Murthy, the director um, of the Gas Station Attendants, Gas Station Attendant. I'm sorry. And I'd like to start with the question: You have your multicultural background obviously shapes your perspective, and how does it influence your filmmaking?
Hmm, that's an interesting question. I've never been asked that before. I'm not really sure about that. I have to think about that, but I think it depends on the setting that I'm in and what kinds of projects. I mean, every project that I've done has been so different. With this being such a personal film, it obviously all of that background went into the filmmaking. I think. Can we go back to that question? I want to think about that more because I haven't really thought about how, I mean, in terms of the themes of the film, it really, and being, the child of immigrants, it
Hmm.
definitely affected how I thought about this particular film and that, I'm never Indian enough or Filipino enough, and sometimes not
Mm.
American enough. I'm constantly moving, in different spaces. And for me, what actually roots me in a place is not necessarily a location, but in the stories. And so it is the stories of both my parents from the Philippines and from India that, I also wanted to pass down to my own kids and that give me a sense of who I am, which I think just naturally filters into all the projects that I make.
All right. As you said, it's the story of your family, but in the foreground of the story of your father. How did you decide which aspects of your father's story to put in the foreground of that particular story?
So the film grew out of these phone calls that I had that I recorded with my dad while he was working nights at a gas station. And I had just moved to New York. And in those phone calls, he wanted to um, just kind of record some of his life experience coming to the States. And so I thought, oh, let's just do this together so I can just keep him company. And it was those phone calls that became sort of the backbone of the film. And I used those calls kind of almost like a source text.
Mm.
Even though, this I had heard many of those stories before growing up, but I used that recording, as the primary kind of source as to what aspects of my dad's story that I was going to include. And so that journey of him coming to the States is really the backbone of the whole film. And I constructed them as sort of these sort of dream sequences of him coming to the States. So I always knew that I was going to include that. And then the other was just through kind of discovery and being in a kind of a state of grief and wandering back to those phone calls and trying to figure out like what it all meant and what did his life mean. And I think it was through that sort of inquiry and that process of writing that, I decided on which other aspects of his life to and my life to include in the film.
What I always found fascinating about these type of stories, there are many documentary filmmakers who decide as their first or their second project to do something about their family story. And I always wonder, how do you keep the balance between something that is very intimate and personal, but also make it universal at the same time? How did you decide to, or how did you balance let's say, how did you balance intimacy and universality? Sorry.
Yeah, that was hard for me. I think a lot of it was the feedback that I was getting from my team was like, just go there with your own story. Because I was worried that, oh, I have such a very specific and unique experience. And they kind of assured me that, like, just go there and then we'll see what happens. So I sort of leaned into just my own personal life and experience. But it really took, like they say, a whole team to make a film. And I think when you're making a personal film, that team is even more important to kind of keep you from becoming like too attached or sentiment, putting in things that are sentimental to you but have no resonance to an audience. And so, for instance, I worked very closely with two consulting editors that really helped me and guide me. And, one of them, Francisco Beo, who's also just an incredible editor, he at one point suggested we do a screening where no one knows anything about me. And
Mhm.
they're not filmmakers and all ages and ranges. And it was a rough cut screening. So that was really scary for me to show people
Mhm.
who aren't filmmakers. It was a little beyond a rough cut. And that was so important because, even my team, a lot of them I had never worked with before, but we all start to fill in the gaps and in the holes of my story without even realizing it. And so that screening was the scariest, but also the most important one that I did in the making of the film. And I think that really helped me, just kind of see the universal themes that were coming out and that feedback that I got from them.
Talking about screenings, in particular that screening, because I can imagine how scary that must have been. Was there any particular reaction that completely took you off guard or that surprised you? Or that perhaps changed the way you perceive the film?
Well, so I was just really worried about how my dad was coming off, and how I was, like what was he, what elements did people resonate with? The thing that really surprised me actually was that it wasn't just an immigrant story. Like we did have people from different backgrounds and they were able to find themselves in the story. Like anyone who's had a complicated relationship with their parent or dealt with grief, losing a loved one or money issues, like they were able to connect with those themes in the film. And that really surprised me, just how different audience members were. I mean, I thought it was, and also just the reactions in ages. We had some people who were in their 20s and some people who were in their 70s. And that was really interesting to see the differences in just how they responded to, especially the style of the film. There was a big debate, I remember, about the title. That was really interesting. And that made me, you know, uh, it made me actually want to keep the title because I had always called
Mm.
it the gas station attendant, but I thought that conversation was so interesting. Just that, people were like, why didn't you call it something else? He was so much more than that. And then some of the younger audience members were like, but I think she did that on purpose, because, it creates this, it's like the person that you meet every day in your life. That's this
Right.
story. And it's this, the intimate stranger is what I like to call it. And I wanted, people to go throughout their lives and notice people like that in their lives differently. So anyway, so yeah, those were some of the things that I remember standing out.
Um, how did you manage the emotional intensity of some of the scenes? How did you manage the emotional intensity of editing personal material?
Well, you have to constantly be changing hats, and that was really hard for me. I actually got a therapist just for this project,
Oh,
and she
okay.
happened to be someone who worked in documentary filmmaking, which was perfect. So there was so much I didn't have to explain. So she already knew like what it takes to make a film. Um, and that was just so, so helpful to have her during the process, like someone I could just talk to. Because there were moments when it was just very intense and it's, you know, the story is about my dad who passed away and it was like living in a suspended state of grief for, the last 3 years, which was not easy to do. And just hearing his voice again and the dreams I was having, I mean, it was very intense. So that was really helpful to have her. And I definitely recommend having someone, maybe not a therapist, but someone like that who gets what it takes to make films. And also just my team was really helpful. Producers often say that they have to be therapists too. So I had such a great, Roger Petroda was like an amazing partner in this process too. So, but yeah, it was hard. It was definitely hard.
Perhaps that's something that many directors should consider having an emotional or a therapist. I was just having thinking back to the kind of discussions or arguments that went on a Werner Herzog set with Klaus Kinski. Maybe a
Mm,
therapist would have helped these guys. Um,
yeah.
um, I read some of the reviews that the gas station attendant got, and some reviewers, even though I don't think it was necessarily a criticism, said they would have liked a another perspective on some of the things, on some of the scenes. Is there a particular scene where you also would have liked to have a another perspective in there?
No, I don't think that this is that kind of film. I mean, this grew out of sort of the personal essay
Hmm.
films, that kind of genre. And in fact, even I have a lot of siblings, and some of them are like, "When are you going to interview me? When are you going to include my perspective?" And I was like, "Oh, well, it's not that kind of film, and it would be
Hmm.
impossible for me to even pretend to be objective and include other
Hmm.
people's voices." And so for me, I actually didn't. I just wanted to limit it to my thoughts and have it feel like a personal journal, a video, a visual diary. So it's really not that kind of film. Yeah, so that would be my answer to that. Just stylistically, it wasn't what I was going for.
All right. Mentioning style, since you're also trained in classical piano, how does this inform your, let's say, feel for the rhythm of filmmaking or for the rhythm of that particular feature? Do you consider it like a piano piece?
I kind of do. I think it's why I love editing so much, because it is a rhythm. And I've always been curious, like how many editors out there have also studied music.
Oh,
Um,
I wonder.
because I just think it's so, or even have a sense of rhythm. I mean, they maybe not even studied it, but they're like not, they can keep a beat. I'm really curious because I do feel like it is a form of composition, and there are things that like I'm really picky about because I hear people's voices like music and they get stuck in my head like that. And the way I interweave, music and voices together, I feel like having a musical background really helped me in that way. It's also maybe made it harder for me because I'm really picky, but um, yeah, I'm curious just to see like how many editors are musicians also. I think it's just very integral to the process.
Hmm. I wonder myself sometimes when you look at the intricate rhythm that some documentaries have and how they go along with the score that they have picked.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, Speaking of the themes, when I saw the gas station attendant, I think it was roughly at the same time when there was these reports coming from the Los Angeles riots with the ICE agents and the deportations. And I was wondering, is there a particular discussion that you would like to that you would like to spark with the gas station attendant?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of empathy. When we were releasing the film, I thought a lot about the context that we were like, what is the world that we're releasing it into? And in fact, I had a different quote at the beginning of the film for a long time that inspired me, and it was, "No man's story can be encompassed in one telling," which is the opening quote for Richard Attenborough's Gandhi, because he felt the weight
Hmm.
of like having to tell this epic story. And for me, I felt the weight of having to tell my dad's story because all my siblings have different, memories and versions of the same story. I mean, I believe we're all into infinite in our stories. And but when we were releasing it and thinking about the world that we were releasing it into, I chose this quote about migration being just a fundamental part of humans, the human story, for that reason, because I think, this kind of story can change how we feel about people through empathy. It's not an overtly political story, but in the context of where we are in the US, I think it is completely political. And it was also why I wanted to dig in with the title and call it the gas station attendant. And I think some of the best reactions I've gotten from people are, someone who like um, he told me later that, he went up to the gas station, the South Asian gas station attendant that he never really talked to in his town and asked him about his life. Um, And I think that's like how you can change society is through these kinds of stories.
This is obviously a wide topic, but and maybe it's just my interpretation, but were you like consciously or subconsciously also making a comment on something like the American dream, for example, and how that it's still achievable, perhaps a bit outdated?
Yes, definitely. That entered my mind when I first even recorded the phone calls with my dad, which was over 20 years ago. And then I just kind of sat on those calls. And again, like those were stories that I heard a million times of him, how he came to the US. And growing up, they felt like fairy tale story endings. I was like, oh, that's the end of the story. He made it to the US. That's the dream. But then listening to him tell me those stories in the confines of a gas station booth, and then having the story be interrupted by someone asking for cigarettes or paying for their gas, it just all of a
Hmm.
sudden hit so differently. Like, what does it mean um, to be here? And for my dad, I think like the dream, yes, was coming here, but it wasn't just about money either. It was about family, and that was his dream. And so through making the film, I sort of started to understand these other ideas of what the American dream actually means for me and for my family and for especially for my dad. But yes, it's definitely a commentary on um, yeah, the American dream.
You already mentioned what you want your audience to take away when you talked about empathy, for example. But since your family has obviously watched the film, what would you like your family to take away from watching the film?
That was the audience that I was the most worried about and thought about
Mm,
the most as how they would see the film. I sent them the film to see when it was in the fine cut stage, and I was just so nervous for each of them to see it, and also like so they could watch it by themselves and kind of process it. Because I think when you tell a family story, especially when you have a lot of siblings, like it almost feels like someone is taking something from you,
mm,
like a sense of ownership. And I was so worried about them having that feeling because, again, they all have different memories of my dad too. And I'm telling like my version of this story. And I also have two older sisters who are artists too. And like everyone has talked about wanting to do something with my dad's story. So I think for them, I just wanted them to um, kind of just remember, um, have this sort of time capsule almost of his life. I mean, there were so many home movies that we hadn't watched in years, and um, and I think, like their reaction was like, oh, it was like watching, yeah, just going, sitting and watching all our home movies again and seeing dad again on the big screen and
mm.
seeing him being recognized, in a theater. It's like an incredible experience to, be in an audience, and see, you know, experience my dad again. So I think, um, yeah, I think that's what I wanted them to take away is just that, like, to remember, like, to remember his life and to remember, there are a lot of family moments in there too, and how he was sort of the glue for us. Um, yeah.
As a sort of last question, since we've covered a lot of ground, we talked about how the gas station attendant talks about the theme of family, but also how it tackles issues like immigration and working class identity. Are these fields that you want to explore further, perhaps in a future project?
I think so. I mean, again, like every project that I've done is so different. Like my last short film was about a trans artist who was incarcerated in Texas.
Mm,
And the film before that was about, my first feature was about, a steel town and generations of families who are working to save, their town. And so I think like I think inherently because of who I am, those are the kinds of stories, going back to your first question, that I am
mm,
drawn to. Um, but it's not something I overtly seek out. Honestly, it's like when I take on a project, it's one that I know that I can live with for a long time and that I'm
mm.
passionate about and it's a story that no one has heard before. or that I feel like people need to hear. So we'll see what the next project will be. I do have an idea for my next project, and it doesn't actually um, hit on ideas of immigration, but it does talk more about, I think, it's a comment on, American ideology and our ideas of American exceptionalism. It does touch on that, but yeah.
All right. So thanks again for taking the time to do the interview. Wish you all the best of luck with the gas station attendant as well as all your future projects.